This episode is brought to you by the Yesterworld podcast, a weekly podcast where we take a deep dive into theme park history, news, and of course discuss the latest episode of Yesterworld. To learn more and listen for yourself, check out the link in the description below. When looking back at the Magic Kingdom's opening day attractions, one that is sure to come to mind is the Country Bear Jamboree. The audio animatronic show was immediately a fan favorite, and the cast of bears have since become theme park icons. However, the story of the Country Bears begins far before Walt Disney World's version opened in 1971, and even where the show has long since been shut down, the Country Bears live on in a number of ways. So let's explore the history of one of Disney's most iconic and occasionally creepy attractions. The story of the Country Bears begins in the most unsuspecting of places at the 1960 Winter Olympics, which were to be held that year in Squaw Valley, California. This was the first time the Winter Games had been held in the United States in nearly 30 years, and the organizing committee felt the event needed the Disney touch, and reached out to Walt Disney hoping he would agree to take the lead on entertainment for all 11 days of the 8th annual Winter Games. Disney saw this as a great privilege and happily accepted the position as chairman of pageantry. Walt was responsible for the opening and closing ceremonies, all decorations and evening entertainment, and he even had a hand in providing security and ticketing. To say Disney went above and beyond for the event would be an understatement, as Walt and his team organized over 5,000 live entertainers, 2,000 pigeons for release, 75 film screenings, 32 snow statues that stood as high as 40 feet tall, and a military salute of 8 gunshots, one to represent each of the previous Winter Games. The spectacle did not go unnoticed, with most in attendance feeling that Disney had set a new entertainment standard for future Olympic outings. Walt spent his time at the event admiring the area's alpine beauty and was struck with inspiration for a year-round family resort in a similar area that could serve to help his company diversify even further than they had 5 years prior with the opening of Disneyland in Anaheim, California. Following the conclusion of the Winter Olympics on February 28th of 1960, Walt set out to find a suitable plot of land to achieve his newest goal. The search was not a short one, and it wasn't until 1965, over 5 years later, when Walt set his sights on the glacial valley of Mineral King in California's Sequoia National Park. The area was ideal for the support of year-round outdoor recreation, which made the site perfect for Walt's vision. By December, Disney had outbid other interested parties, and they were granted a 3-year permit to begin development on their newest resort. Walt proposed a budget of $35 million to create a fully self-contained village and ski resort that could be used with no off-season. However, Walt was well aware his vision needed a touch of Disney magic to reach full potential, and began working on ideas for evening entertainment to keep his guests engaged and on-site even after the sun had set. Walt was fixated on the idea of creating a show hosted by bears just to fit in with the resort surroundings, and assigned the project to legendary Imagineer Marc Davis. In collaboration with Disney animator Al Bertino, Davis created several bear group concepts, including a one-bear band, a bear marching band, a mariachi band featuring bears, and even Dixieland bears. In late 1966, Walt Disney stopped to visit with Marc Davis and check out the progress on the project, and the group now officially named the Country Bear Band.
Walt had been ill, and he came back to WED to see Marc and some of the others, and he walked to Marc's room and sat down and and a number of people came, and Walt reached out with his hand and patted a couple of them on the tummy and said, I just want to see Marc for a while here. He said, I came to see Marc, and Marc said he looked terribly thin and drawn, and wasn't too well at all. And so he asked Marc what he had been doing with the bears. So Marc got all the different bears out, and he said when you had a lot of things to show Walt, and Walt was enjoying it, it was like giving presents to little kids to open at Christmas. He said Walt started looking at the different bear bands and so forth and started laughing, and Mark always felt that that was one of the last laughs that Walt had. And then Walt said, you know, he said, I think I better get somebody to take me back to the studio. I'm getting awfully tired. And so they came to get Walt to take him back to the studio. And he walked from Mark's door, and Mark was standing in the doorway, and he walked up short distance from Mark, and then he turned around and looked at Mark, and he said, goodbye, Mark. And then he turned around and left. And he died shortly afterward. And Mark said he knew that it was the last time he'd see Walt, because Walt never said goodbye. He always said, I'll see you next week, or I'll check with you tomorrow on what you're doing. Never said goodbye.
Despite the devastating loss of Walt Disney, plans for the Country Bears progressed, and at this time, the band featured an almost entirely different cast of characters than we now know, with Little Lemonade Bear, Big Fred, Old Zeke, Cousin Ted, and Brother Zeb. Around this same time, a brief demo was created featuring the current lineup of the Country Bears for the Mineral King Resort.
The Bear Band Bears are ready, they're set to serenade. Zeke and Zeb and Ted and Fred and the bear named Lemonade. So clap your hands and stomp your feet to the bear toe tapping rhythm. Chuck your worries out the door and try to keep right with them.
Unfortunately, while plans for the Country Bears were still progressing, plans for the ski resort where they were meant to reside crumbled in 1969, when an environmental organization known as the Sierra Club filed suit against the US government, protesting the permits that Disney would require to build the resort. This put an indefinite halt on the Mineral Springs project, yet the team of Imagineers working on the audio animatronic show had no intentions of scrapping the Country Bears, and decided that the soon-to-be-opened Magic Kingdom in Orlando, Florida would be the perfect new home for the show, more specifically Frontierland. Imagineers worked night and day to finish the attraction in time for the Magic Kingdom's grand opening, and hired Imagineer ex Atencio and musical director George Bruns to finalize the music the Bears would sing, and decide which bear would take the lead for each of the 15 very short songs written for the show. Fortunately, the troubles for the Country Bears were in the past, and development of the attraction went ahead as planned leading up to the opening day of the Magic Kingdom. Grizzly Hall, a theater with a 350-person capacity, was constructed in Frontierland to house the attraction, and once the animatronics had been moved into the show building and programmed for the show, the Country Bears were ready to make their public debut.
No doubt about it, music is an international language. The only thing is, when you get down around my part of the country, it has a little bit of an accent, you know. Now we're about to hear the Disney Audio Animatronics Bear Band stomp out some of my kind of music, like this. Eat your heart out, Jerry Reed.
The Country Bear Jamboree was a huge hit on the Magic Kingdom's opening day of October 1st, 1971, with its 16-minute runtime giving guests the perfect opportunity to cool off while enjoying the wild antics of each of the Country Bears. Every one of the 18 bears were beloved by audiences, with characters like Henry the Showmaster and the accurately named Liver Lips quickly becoming fan favorites. The music of the show was so popular an album was quickly pushed out featuring songs from the attraction, so fans could bring the music and bears they had come to love home with them, and of course ensure they spent a few extra dollars while in the park. The Country Bears were such a hit on the East Coast that plans were almost immediately set into motion to bring the bears over to Disneyland, alongside a new area of the park, Bear Country. What was then known as the Indian Village, a section of Disneyland featuring Native American shows and attractions, was completely demolished to make way for Bear Country and the Country Bear Jamboree, which opened as the centerpiece of the new themed land on March 4th of 1972, less than 6 months after the opening of the original. The Country Bear Jamboree was the first Disney World original attraction to be cloned in the much older Disneyland park, and the Anaheim version was all but identical to its East Coast counterpart. The only real difference was its size, as Imagineers had anticipated the attraction to be equally as popular in California, and constructed 2 theaters for the bears to double the attraction's capacity. The California version was also sponsorless for nearly 3 years, until Wonder Bread took the position in 1975, whereas the original in Orlando had a day one sponsor in Pepsi Cola. After the Country Bears had been established in both Disneyland and Disney World, the show remained exactly as it had on opening day for over a decade. A replica of the Disneyland version was constructed for the opening day of Tokyo Disneyland in 1983, with 2 separate theaters each running the show. The Tokyo Disneyland version did feature a few minor changes, with the animatronics being slightly more advanced to reflect the advances in technology since the original had opened a decade prior, and the stage also featured a black curtain unlike both others, which used a red curtain. And while the dialogue in Tokyo was in Japanese, many of the songs were still in English. It wasn't until November of 1984 that both US versions of the attraction received a major update, with the Country Bear Christmas special debuting that season. The overlay featured each of the characters dressed in holiday-themed outfits and replaced the standard track list with traditional Christmas carols, with a few original barrels thrown in for good measure. The seasonal overlay was the first of its kind and ran from November through January each year, and a slightly altered version of the Christmas special made its way to Tokyo Disneyland in 1988. The Christmas special wasn't the only update the Bears would receive in the mid-1980s, as just 2 years after the introduction of the holiday special, the main show was completely replaced by a new overlay, the Country Bear Vacation Hoedown, which opened in Disneyland and Disney World in 1986. This version of the show took you on a new adventure with the Bears as they enjoyed the outdoors on a summer vacation. The new version of the show was plagued with issues during its initial run, with the updated technology for the overlay causing the Bears to go haywire on several occasions.
It all seems so perfect. Does anything ever go wrong?
Things go wrong all the time. For example, once Gomer, we had a little problem with him with the computer, where when it went out with 500 pounds of oil pressure, he actually picked up his piano and threw it on one of the other bears.
In your dreams at night, you see bears.
Every night.
On top of the performance issues, the Country Bears Vacation Hoedown was met with complete indifference from park goers. In Disneyland, where the Country Bears had never caught on quite as well as in Orlando, the attraction retained the same level of popularity. However, Disney World, where the attraction was a favorite, saw a sharp decline in the show's attendance following the addition of the overlay. As a result of this, the Vacation Hoedown was removed entirely from the Magic Kingdom in 1992, only 6 years after it had been first introduced. The show was then reverted back to the original version on rotation with the Christmas special. Despite the mixed reception, the Country Bears Hoedown lived on in Disneyland for the rest of its days, and an altered version of the show was even introduced in Tokyo Disneyland in 1994, albeit with a slightly different name of the Country Bears Vacation Jamboree. In spite of the waning popularity in Anaheim, the Country Bears managed to stick around until 2001, when the attraction was shut down to make space for another bear-themed attraction, the Mini Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. The attraction's closing was seen as quite the surprise, as Disney were in the middle of producing a film based on the attraction at that time, which was released the following year under the title of The Country Bears. As it would turn out, the film would open to some of the worst reviews of the year and would lose the studio upwards of $20 million, so it's possible that Disney had seen the writing on the wall and acted accordingly. Imagineers had fought to save Disneyland's version of the Country Bears in some way, and had proposed a dark ride they called the Country Bear 500 to serve as a replacement, reusing many of the animatronics from the existing show. The idea was rejected, and Winnie the Pooh evicted the Bears from their 20-year home shortly thereafter. However, despite their removal, the Country Bears live on in Disneyland in a number of ways. While riding the Mini Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, guests who are perceptive and quickly turn around following the Heffalump scene can quickly spot the heads of Melvin, Buff, and Max, the 3 trophy heads from the Country Bears, mounted up on the wall as a tribute to the defunct attraction. Another animatronic lives on in the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay of the Haunted Mansion, as the animatronic Oogie Boogie is actually a reskinned version of Big Al, the biggest bear of them all. Even though the popularity of the show has slowly declined throughout the years, the Country Bear Jamboree has remained in both Walt Disney World and Tokyo Disneyland through to the present day. In 2011, Walt Disney World's Country Bear Jamboree was given a major refurbishment in which all of the characters were given new skins, and the show was altered considerably, with many of the songs shortened and 2 being scrapped altogether. In present-day Tokyo, the attraction still rotates through each of the 3 variations of the show throughout the year, while in Walt Disney World, just the shortened version of the original remains, as the Christmas special was scrapped after the 2005 holiday season for unknown reasons. However, Disney has given us no reason to think the beloved bears are going anywhere soon, and the remaining 2 locations of the attraction have always been a great place for exhausted parkgoers just to take a quick breather while enjoying the air-conditioned show. Either way, whatever the future of the Country Bear Jamboree holds, it's safe to say that it would be unbearable if we ever had to see them go. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you haven't already, make sure to check out the Yesterworld podcast, which can be found in the description below.